and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you haven't already, then please remember to subscribe and like this video. Today is going to be more of an educational style video, so I'm going to be running you through essentially how to grow your glutes, but we're going to split it into 5 things that are incredibly overrated, that people definitely spend too much time doing, that either are not really going to help you or can actually hinder your progress in terms of growing your glutes, and I think some of them probably will surprise you. They go against the majority of what you see on Instagram. And then also I'll run you through kind of the 5 most important things to make sure that you're doing if you want to grow your glutes. If you want more videos like this, then I'm happy to take requests, like leave it in the comments, and yeah, enjoy the video. So I'm going to start off with the things that I think are incredibly overrated, and like I said, they either don't really help you or they actually hinder your progress, because I thought they'd probably be the most interesting. So first one is like booty band or glute activation warm-ups. So it isn't to say that these are necessarily wrong. If you are going to do them, then one thing is do not overdo them. Literally a couple of minutes maximum. You really do not need to do very much. They'll be good for people who are maybe new to training. They're not used to kind of feeling a muscle. Maybe your mind muscle connection isn't great, but still I would argue that that's not the best way to do it, because it changes the sensation, but I'll talk about that on the 5th reason that I give. But basically they're largely overdone and oversold. You can grow your glutes just as well without doing any glute activation, and I would argue that actually you're much better off using that energy towards your first working sets than you are doing a million like fire hydrants and donkey kicks and whatever. I would use bands a bit more if someone is working out from home with very limited equipment, then maybe, but for people in the gym, we need to focus on those things that are actually going to grow your glutes, and the glute activation warm-ups are not it. The fact that also lots of kind of glute workouts are pretty much just banded exercises, probably not really going to see much change with this. So yeah, glute activation workouts, you don't actually need them. If you are going to use them, keep it short. Do not go to failure. You don't want to completely fatigue your muscles before you've even started your workout. So number 2 is this fascination with like high rep, low weights. Basically at any point, realistically, you need to be working with a heavy weight relative to the rep range that you're using. So obviously if you're doing kind of 12 to 15 reps, you're not going to be able to do the same weight for that as you would for 8 to 10 reps, and that is fine. But just because you're doing high reps doesn't mean you need to completely drop the weight and just be doing it so easily. Where you want to be for muscle growth is close to failure. You know, when you're in the gym and you're working really hard and you're doing those final few reps and like they're really slow, and in your head you're like, I don't want to be here, because you're grinding through those last reps. They are hard and you're not quite sure if you're going to get them or not. Those are the kind of reps you want to be aiming for. That is kind of close to failure, and that is what is going to elicit the response that you want in order to grow your muscle, in this case your glutes. So doing 30 reps at a rate that's way too light for you is not really going to do anything. You might feel the burn, which again I'll come to later, but that's not going to be effective for growing your glutes. So the other thing is that you kind of want to utilize a bit more of a range. When you go to a too high rep range, when you're doing over a certain amount of reps, which there's kind of debate about how much that is. So for example, if you're doing like 30, 40 reps, then that is probably just going to elicit a response that's more kind of endurance style, so you might as well be doing like a circuit or something like that. High reps to me when I'm doing programming is typically around 12 to 15. Sometimes we go up to 20 for kind of end rep stuff, but for the main compounds I normally don't have people doing 20 reps of them. We normally keep it between 8 to 15, sometimes a bit lower, sometimes a bit higher, but that's kind of a good range to stick in. This high rep, low weight stuff is kind of a load of crap, and you want to be working with a heavy weight relative to the rep range that you're working in. The third thing that is completely overrated is using bands in exercises. For example, people using a mini band around their legs for Romanian deadlifts, or for squats, or for, I don't know, even hip thrusts really. It doesn't make sense. It's not going to help you grow your glutes more. Largely this is going to cause more abduction, which is kind of your legs pushing outwards. What happens with that, why people think it makes them grow their glutes, or I can feel it in my glutes a bit more, it's because you're using your piriformis, which is not really the glute, it's like, but it's inside that kind of area. So that burning sensation you feel is mostly just overworking your piriformis. And the other thing is, lots of people who do these type of workouts tend to suffer with pain in their hips, and that's because they're overworking their piriformis muscle, because they're banding everything and things that don't need to be banded. For example, if you're doing hip thrusts, again, maybe if someone was working out from home literally with one dumbbell, I would do this, but in the gym I would never band a hip thrust. That's a mistake that I definitely did in the past. When you are doing stuff like a hip thrust, to grow your glutes, what you want to be doing is coming right up to full hip extension, so your bum is kind of right up to the top, straight line. When you're looking down your chin from your shoulders to your knees, that straight line without your bum dipping down. When you do abduction, that prevents you from mostly getting up to full hip extension, because your legs are kind of pushing out, you're not able to get up. So actually by banding these exercises, you're not actually then getting the benefit of the exercise. Over banding exercises, or even banding exercises that you don't need to band, you don't need to do it. It's not going to help you, and like I said, it's probably actually going to prevent you getting the benefit out of the exercises that you want to get. So the fourth one is down a similar route, and that is a sumo stance. It's like sumo deadlifts, they're key for glutes, sumo squats, they're key for glutes. If you want anything glutes, go in a sumo position, and that is completely incorrect. Again, when you're pushing your legs out in a sumo stance, then that is recruiting largely your adductors, which is your inner thigh. So actually, rather than getting your glutes, which is what you're kind of aiming to get, you're focusing on your adductors, which is your inner thighs, and your quads, which, you know, is not the purpose if you're trying to grow your glutes. So sumo stance is in fact not the right stance. That goes for, like I said, deadlifts, that goes for squats, that goes for hip thrusts. You know, for deadlifts, if you want one that's best for glutes, then go for Romanian deadlifts. Even conventional deadlifts, they're better than sumo. So it's just this misunderstanding, and again, it's because it's just promoted online. But yeah, sumo stance, not keen for glutes at all. Like I said, it's going to recruit your adductors more than anything. So unless you want to really grow your inner thighs, you don't really need to do that. Obviously, if you're just talking from a performance aspect, lots of people can lift heavier with sumo deadlifts than conventional deadlifts because the bar doesn't have to travel so far. So if someone was going for like a PR in terms of their weight that they lift, maybe they'd choose sumo. But if you're training to change the shape of your body and you want to grow your glutes, you should never really be doing sumo stance. It just doesn't make sense. And then the fifth one, it's the feeling the burn, and it goes along those lines with the bands and the sumo stance and everything. And people are like, I can feel the burn, it must be working. Chasing sensation is not what you want to be doing. That doesn't really mean anything, you know. You could do a million squats with a band and be like, my bum is on fire, like bodyweight squats. That probably is not going to grow your glutes at all. But oh my god, my bum's on fire, I can feel it, you know, it must be growing. Whereas maybe you might do 8 squats with the barbell, really good form, working really close to failure at a really heavy weight and progressing each week. Probably won't feel the burn in your glutes, but that's going to be 10 times more effective for growing them because it's helping your body elicit the response which you want, which in this case is muscle growth. So if you're just going off sensation, you would pick the one that actually is going to be probably completely ineffective over the one that's actually going to grow your glutes. So you need to stop chasing the sensation and actually just focus on the exercise you're doing and the execution of that exercise. So for example, in a hip thrust, coming straight up to full hip extension, that's going to be really key. Obviously, yes, we do want mind muscle connection, but that's not necessarily the same thing as feeling the burn. But if your form is right, and if you need to check that, I would film yourself, you know, get a PT if you need one. As long as you're performing it correctly and with intent and progressing each week and working close to failure, then that's going to be 10 times more effective than feeling the burn. So those are the 5 things that are like completely overrated and actually, like I said, hinder your progress in terms of glute growth. Then my 5 things that I think are key for glute growth. Obviously you can add more to this list, but I'm trying to keep it 5 and 5, so these are kind of the ones that I think you really can't go without. So number 1 is your program. Your program has to be effective, and this can mean several different things, and you need to be sticking to it for a long enough period of time. Often people will kind of change up the workouts to shock your muscles, when in fact shocking your muscle isn't a thing. Of course, occasionally you change your program, you also don't want to get bored of it. Normally I keep resistance programs for about 8 weeks. That's what I seem to find works best with my clients. Sometimes a little bit less depending what equipment you have accessible to you. A long enough period of time, I'd say minimum 4 weeks, but if you can stick it out for 6, 8, 10 or even 12, then I would suggest to do that. As long as you're still progressing on it and you are able to increase your weight or reps, then you should be sticking to that program as long as you're seeing that progress. Another thing I mean by effective programming is including the correct exercises. So like I said before, you know, making it sumo squats, sumo deadlift, cyclist squats or whatever, all these things are not going to be the most effective exercises. You do want a balanced program, so I would still recommend including things that are more quad biased than hamstring biased occasionally. You don't have to do them as your main compounds though. So if someone really wants to grow their glutes, that's the main goal. You'd be including things like Romanian deadlifts. I actually really like these with the trap bar at the moment. You'd want hip thrust and different variations, so calf glute bridge probably is even more effective than the hip thrust. I have a video about that on my Instagram, which is Absies, if you want to check that out. And then things like Bulgarian split squats, but with a glute bias, so leaning forward. So you want a mixture of all the movement patterns. That's really key. So squat, deadlift or hinge, hip thrust / bridge and lunges. But it's up to you kind of what variations you include. You can make them more glute biased, quad biased or hamstring biased. But like I said, I wouldn't completely neglect your quads and hamstrings, because first of all, that's asking for injury. Second of all, if you like avoid them altogether, you'll be avoiding the main compounds that are really going to help you grow. But my point is, overall, you'd be kind of looking to include exercises with more of a glute bias and a variety, like I said, with the squat, hinge, bridge / thrust and lunge movement patterns. So that's really key as well. Don't just do a million hip thrusts. That is not going to get you to where you want to be. You want to be targeting different parts of the glutes. An extra thing that I do think is good to include is 45-degree back extensions, just because that also trains the glutes in the shortened position. So that's the same as maybe a hip thrust and stuff would. I also like glute medius kickbacks, but apart from that, those are like the main ones. So you want a good variety of exercises and also not too much. People seem to think they need to do every single exercise under the sun in one program. Again, if you have too much volume, you're gonna be hindering the gains that you can make. Overtraining is not gonna help you with growth. The actual growth itself and the adaptation to the response to the stimulus that you provide in your workout, that happens when you're resting. So if you're overdoing it on the volume and your body can't keep up and it's not recovering properly, then that could be one reason as well why you're not seeing the gains that you want. You're training hard, but you're training too hard. You know, train smart. Less exercises, more intent with them. You'll be able to lift heavier on those exercises and have more quality workouts. Although yes, you need enough volume, so maybe 10 to 20 working sets per muscle group that you want to grow per week. You also want to not be overdoing it, because that's not going to help you either. The second thing, again, is related, but it's about training and how you approach your training. So the intensity of your training and the progression. So like I said kind of before, you want to be working close to failure, not at failure on every working set. That's just a recipe for injury or burning out, but you do want to be working close to failure. So you want to be going into your workout expecting to get to those reps where you're really pushing. You know, those are the ones that you really want to get, because it proves that you're pushing your body somewhere that it hasn't been before and you're progressing on that. And that, again, like I said, is what's going to elicit the response that you actually want from your workout. The second thing in terms of how you approach your training is your progression. So you should be doing progressive overload each week. That is why you need to stick to your program for a period of time so that you can do that. Progressive overload is kind of keeping all the variables the same, but improving one of them. So the simplest things to do is to increase weight or reps. So if you're going to increase the reps, keep the weight the same as the week before and increase the rep within the range that you're given, or keep the reps the same and increase the weight, maybe by like 2.5 kg or 5 kg. It just depends kind of what the program is, but you want to be progressing each week. Don't increase the weight and then decrease the reps again. You want to keep something the same but do the other thing better. So that's really important that you do as well, that you're kind of progressing on that and pushing to progress on every exercise every single week. It's also worth mentioning there are other ways to progressive overload. You know, like you can slow the movement down, you can add pauses, you can add pulses, like all these other things. But if you're already following a structured program, I would recommend just mostly sticking to weight and reps if you're already competent with your form. And that also brings me on to my third kind of point again about training, which is form and mind muscle connection. If your form is not good, if you are not performing exercises correctly, then it's unlikely that you're going to be targeting the muscles that you want to target and again getting the response that you want to. So for example, again, if you're doing hip thrusts and you're trying to whack up the weight because you're trying to get your progression, but you're doing kind of half reps, you're never coming right up to the top, there's always this like dip down where your bum is, probably you're not going to see that much progress because you're not actually taking your body through to full hip extension, which is what you need, because that's where all the tension is, where your glutes basically. For example, if you're doing squats, if you're squatting like ass to grass, realistically you're going to be getting your quads more, whereas you want to be coming to 90 degrees. So it just depends what you're aiming for, where you're aiming to get, and make sure that you're doing it correctly. You're not kind of half doing reps for the sake of doing more weight. So that is something that's also really important. So make sure that your form is correct. Again, not chasing sensation, but just doing exercises with purpose and aiming for mind muscle connection. For example, when I'm doing a hip thrust or a calf glute bridge, I do it very controlled, and as I go up to the top, I'm literally imagining my glutes squeezing to drive me up, and that can really help as well. So again, just intent and form and making sure that you're actually doing the exercises as they're meant to do so that you actually elicit the response that you want and target the correct muscles. Fourth one, onto nutrition, is calories. So it's going to be very difficult for you to grow your glutes in a calorie deficit. People seem to love to live in a calorie deficit. I know that that goes a bit more deeply than just choice, but you need to be eating enough to grow. How can you expect something to grow if you're not giving it that fuel? How are you expecting it to grow and adapt and change due to the stimulus you've provided in your workouts if you're not giving it enough calories to do so? The most optimal place for you to be in, if you're serious about glute growth, is to be in a small surplus. You do not need to be in a giant one. Yes, maybe your glutes might grow a bit faster if you're in a giant one, but that is largely going to be fat mass, and if you cut back down, that will just go. So you can only gain a certain amount of muscle in a certain amount of time. So just a small surplus, take it slowly, and for a prolonged period of time. People also say, okay, I'm gonna do a gaining phase. 8 weeks later, they're back in a deficit. No, you have to commit to it, and I would really recommend sticking it out for at least 6 months, if not more. So that's another reason to stick to a smaller surplus, because if you're doing a giant surplus from day one, or a dirty bulk, or whatever you want to call it, you then get a couple weeks in, you're like, maybe I should cut again, because you freaked yourself out because you gained so much fat mass. Whereas if you're doing it more slowly and more controlled, you can maintain that for a long period of time because you're minimizing the fat gain while still being in a surplus. So that's the first thing. Make sure you're having enough calories, first of all for the changes that you're gonna make, but also so that you actually have enough energy to push and progress in your sessions to your maximal potential. So it just makes sense. And then my 5th tip is, again, nutrition, but on the protein side of things. Again, if you're not eating enough protein, then you're not going to be achieving the muscle gain or hypertrophy that you want to the level that you could. I would recommend about 1.8 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Try and get complete sources, especially if you're vegan. Either pick a complete source or pair 2 sources that would make a complete source. That's going to do you better. Also, spreading your protein intake throughout the day. That seems to be most optimal for muscle protein synthesis. A common misconception is that your body only absorbs a certain amount of protein at one time. That's not correct. It will absorb everything you put in your body, but it's just that that amount will be used for muscle protein synthesis. So just kind of spread it out throughout the day. You know, have some for breakfast, try and have something in the snack, lunch, dinner, whatever. And it also makes it easier to get in as well than getting it in one go. So make sure you're having enough protein. It's also going to make sure that your recovery and everything is better as well. So those are my 5 tips on how to grow your glutes. Those are things I think are largely overrated. You can get rid of them, stop wasting your time, and focus on the other 5, which are very, very important. Thanks for listening to this video. If you like it, again, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm sorry there was no video last week. I wasn't very well, but I am continuing with a video every single week. If you want more of these educational style ones, just let me know in the comments. I'm more than happy to do them. I enjoy doing them. I enjoy sharing information. So yeah, I'm literally happy to do a mix of everything. So yes, I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.